First Mises University was last summer about this time, and since that event, we've gone through cataclysmic changes in the world, and what we've seen, I think, in this last part of last year and continuing this year is the most exciting event of the 20th century, certainly in my lifetime, I think, in the 20th century, namely the total revolutionary collapse of socialism-communism. And it was just fantastic, and that's part of the case for optimism about the future. Excuse me, is the fact that something happened which nobody predicted would happen in any sort, at least at that time, in that sort of way, is that we had a totalitarian monolith. One friend of mine claimed about 2-3 years ago that communism succeeded in brainwashing all the people, all their subjects, so they created a new socialist man, the man that they were trying to achieve, and therefore everything was hopeless. And typical of this person is he's not exactly a very good prophet. And shortly after his article was written, came the beginnings of the whole collapse of communism. And one of the great things about it, in addition to the fact that it shows that the spirit of freedom cannot be wiped out in mankind, is that it shows the power of ideas. You know, that it's very difficult. We tend to get pessimistic sometimes. Some people do. Some laggards. Some of the faint of heart. Because here we're pouring forth ideas, and Mises, for example, I'll get to that in a minute, all of his life was fighting for freedom and opposed to tyranny and socialism. And you think, well, how can ideas affect history? And we're locked in, of course, we all know about the public choice trap. The public choicers, who tend to be free market people, are trapped in this extremely gloomy, pessimistic world outlook, namely that special privileges, of course, as we all know, special privileges out to shaft us 24 hours a day. They're constantly working for lobbying and special privileges and monopoly and contracts and all that. When the rest of us, the consumers, the average person, is not interested in any one particular focus, like the sugar market or the grain market or whatever, 24 hours a day. And therefore, the consumer is, quote, rationally ignorant, unquote, and uncaring about these particular fields and areas. And therefore, it's inevitable the special privileges always win out, and tyranny and statism win out, and that's it. There's no hope. And every person, since every person is only interested in their narrow, short-run economic interests, there's no way of getting out of this trap. George Stigler, for example, the distinguished dean of Chicago School of Economics, or one of the two deans at least, view is that ideas have no influence on history whatsoever. I mean, it's as if everybody's writing in a sort of a vacuum, or writing for each other professors. And there's no point to any of this as far as affecting history goes. And coming from an historian of economic thought, it's kind of a depressing picture. So why are you doing all this if none of this has any impact? So, but we find out here a dramatic example of the exact opposite. In other words, here was the communist system, totally locked in, as I say, alleged monolith, special privileges with nomenclatura, totally dominant. Everybody had to work for the state. Everybody's lives were organized by the state and commanded by the state. And therefore, there seemed to be no hope. And so obviously something, and here's a situation where people like Ludwig von Mises, for example, Etienne Laboétie, David Hume, and Ludwig von Mises always kept insisting that in the long run, ideas are the things that count. It's not short-run economic interests. It's the ideas held by the public that determine historical events. That no government has however much force they command, however much instruments of terror they use on the population, no government can last any length of time unless the public supports it. The majority of the public endorse it one way or the other for whatever reason. And this seemed to be outmoded in the days of totalitarianism, the days when the government has all these dread instruments of torture and high technology at their command. How can the average person resist this? And we've all read Orwell's 1984. Of course, it's a very gloomy picture. Everything is shot. Everything is finished. The totalitarian elite will win out. And then at the beginning of all this process, Ludwig von Mises in 1920 wrote his famous article, An Economic Calculation of Socialist Commonwealth, the beginning of this whole monstrous collectivist process in the 20th century, and he said it's not going to work. In other words, in addition to the moral ideas, the moral failures of socialism, and all the other, and the political philosophic failures and sociological failures, this ain't going to work. Socialism is impossible, as he put it, and cannot plan a modern industrial system. It's going to fall apart. Can't calculate. And this was allegedly rebutted. The socialists, by the way, in those days took this very seriously. This is the first time that they'd come to their attention as a problem other than the incentive problem. You know about the incentive problem. Everybody acknowledged that from the very beginning of socialism, even before socialism. The great socialist experiment of the Soviet Union was established. The incentive problem is if everybody's equal and if everybody takes according to his needs and gives according to his ability, who's going to take out the garbage? Who's going to do the dirty work? What's going to happen? And the answer, basically, the socialist was, socialism will create a new socialist man, which will be cheerful and robotic and dedicating his whole life to the service of the state apparatus. And essentially Mises said, look, even setting that aside, whether or not you can do that, even having a bunch of robots who are cheerfully rushing to obey the commands of the state, what will the state be able to tell them? What will the state tell them to do? How will they be able to plan and calculate and where some production should be established and what processes should be used and what combinations and so forth? And he said they can't do it because there's no free market on the means of production. There's no genuine market which establishes a genuine price system, and therefore they won't know their cost, they won't know if they're doing well or badly, and the whole thing will fall apart. Socialists, taking this very seriously, try to refute it. We had about 20 years or 15 years of debate back and forth, especially in Europe, where Mises, of course, was published. The conclusion, which was accepted by every right-thinking economist by the late 30s, was that's okay, we can have a market socialism, we can tell the managers to play market, so forth and so on. And this was generally accepted by the establishment. And everybody sat back, well, that problem was disposed of, they don't have to worry anymore. Socialism is okay, we just have this artificial market, so-called market. And Mises refuted that and human action. And the economic establishment, so to speak, determined that the whole problem was over, don't worry about it, socialism can do it. Well, here we are, and at the end, one of his last articles in his life, Oscar Longa, a monstrous little article called The Computer on the Market, really refuted his whole approach. He had said in his economic theory of socialism, we don't have to worry, socialism doesn't have to worry about calculation, we just have a phony market, we have trial and error, and we can do it very easily. And then in 1963, or 65, I guess, just before he died, he said, we don't have to worry. Now, if I was writing my answer to Mises and Hayek today, I'd simply say, look, we have the computer, the great new institution, great new mechanism, which will plan everything in 2 seconds. In fact, it's better than the market. I don't have to worry about it. And then he passed on. At any rate, we now find in Eastern Europe and Soviet Union a fantastic demonstration of vindication of Mises' whole approach. The whole thing collapsed. It turns out socialism is indeed impossible. And popping up from this rubble, we find a whole enormous, unbelievable to all of us, enormous outcropping and outpouring of Misesians and Hayekians all over Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. And one of the physical embodiments of that, of course, was here this week, the wonderful Yuri Maltsev. I'm sure you've all met. And here he is. He's now honored in the Soviet Union as a prophet, and they want him back. Come back and help us plan and so forth. Of course, Yuri's too shrewd for that.